Today I'll be reading on the subject of emptiness. I decided to read some stuff canonically after Sampano Bhikkhu had read some of the things from Tulku Ugyen Rinpoche. I'm going to start off with a very short sutta of the Samyutta Nikaya, then I'll read excerpts from an article from Analayo Bhikkhu, and then I'll read the Chula Sunyata Sutta. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ dhammang sanghang namasami. So the first sutta is out of the Nidāna Book of Causation. It's in the chapter 9, the connected discourses with similes, and it's the 7th sutta called the drum peg. At Savatthi Bhikkhus, once in the past, the Dasaras had a kettle drum called the summoner. When the summoner became cracked, the Dasaras inserted another peg. Eventually, the time came when the summoner's original drumhead had disappeared, and only a collection of pegs remained. So too, bhikkhus, the same thing will happen with the bhikkhus in the future. When those discourses spoken by the Tathagata that are deep in meaning, supermundane, dealing with emptiness, are being recited, they will not be eager to listen to them, nor lend an ear to them, nor apply their minds to understand them, and they will not think those teachings should be studied and mastered. But when those discourses that are mere poetry, composed by poets, beautiful in words and phrases, created by outsiders, spoken by their disciples, are being recited, they will be eager to listen to them, will lend an ear to them, will apply their minds to understand them, and they will think those teachings should be studied and mastered. In this way, bhikkhus, those discourses spoken by the Tathagata that are deep in meaning, supermundane, dealing with emptiness, will disappear. Therefore, bhikkhus, you should train yourself thus. When those discourses spoken by the Tathagata that are deep in meaning, supermundane, dealing with emptiness, are being recited, we will be eager to listen to them, we will lend an ear to them, we will apply our minds to understand them, and we will think those teachings should be studied and mastered. Thus, you should train yourselves. This article by Bhikkhu Analayo is out of the Encyclopedia of Buddhism, 2007, volume 8. And in this he had 2 articles on Sunyata, one from the Theravadan perspective and one from the Mahayana, and I'll be reading some portions of the Theravadan article. Sunyata is an abstract noun formed from the adjective sunya, which means empty or void. It is noteworthy that in the Pali discourses, the adjective sunya occurs with a much higher frequency than the corresponding noun sunyata. This is not a matter of mere philological interest, but points to an emphasis in early Buddhism on qualifying phenomena as being empty rather than on an abstract state of emptiness. The word empty, sunya, occurs often in a straightforward and simple sense to qualify a place or location to be empty in the most common sense of the word. A typical example of this is sunyagara, an empty place, which due to being devoid of people, noise, distraction, etc., is a place suitable for meditative seclusion. Digha Nikaya 291. To find delight in seclusion afforded by such an empty place counts as an important requirement for one gone forth. Anguttara 588. The same quality, however, renders such an empty place less suitable as a resort for gathering alms. Majjhima 1, 519. Or for proclaiming one's teaching. Digha Nikaya 1, 175. Sunya can also be predicated of a group of people in order to specify that they are bereft of a certain quality. For example, the members of a particular group of ascetics are empty of going to heaven in the sense that none of them will be able to gain celestial rebirth. Majjhima 1, 483. According to another usage of similar type, as long as there are those who undertake the Noble Eightfold Path, the world will not be empty of arahants. Tigha Nikaya 2, 151. Through qualifying a place or a group of people as empty of something may at first sight appear to be far from the deeper connotation of emptiness. The two senses are actually intertwined. To speak of emptiness as far as the Pali discourses are concerned, it is necessary to speak of particular phenomena as empty of something. Hence, even the peak of emptiness, the realization of full awakening and unsurpassable mental freedom, is empty of. Empty of what? Empty of lust, anger, and delusion. Majjhima 1, 298. In some passages, the Buddha used the expression empty in both a common and a deeper sense. For example, when he employed the image of an empty village as a symbol for the six sense bases, Samyutta 4, 173, though the primary sense of sunya here is clearly to be physically empty, in the sense that the village has been deserted by people, the Buddha brought in the deeper notion of sunya by explaining that when a wise person investigates the senses, he or she will find that they are empty, sunya, void, ritta, and vain, tucca. In this way, the empty quality of the village, representative of the village being devoid of people, finds equivalent in the empty nature of the senses, highlighting the senses are devoid of self. A lead over from the empty nature of a location to a deeper aspect of emptiness as a step-by-step meditative development can be found in the Chula Sunyata Sutta, the smaller discourse on emptiness, Majjhima Nikaya 3, 104. This discourse begins with Ānanda inquiring about an earlier statement by the Buddha, according to which the Buddha often was dwelling in emptiness, Sunyata Vihara. In order to show Ānanda how to achieve such a dwelling, the Buddha directed Ānanda's attention to the immediate environment where they were staying. He pointed out that the place was empty of the human hustle and bustle of township. Giving attention to this absence as a type of emptiness experience yields a unitary perception of the forest. Based on such a unitary perception of the forest, the Buddha continues with a meditative deepening of emptiness that proceeded from a unitary perception of earth, through the four immaterial attainments to the silentless concentration of the mind, animitta cetosamadhi. Each step of this meditative deepening of emptiness requires a clear awareness of what has been transcended at each point, of what the present experience is empty of. When, for example, the perception of earth has been transcended by developing the perception of boundless space, this experience of boundless space is empty of any perceptual experience of earth. The meditative deepening of emptiness described in this discourse requires at the same time a clear awareness of what is still present. Thus, when one has proceeded from the perception of earth to the perception of boundless space, this experience of boundless space is not empty, asunya, of perception of space. It is precisely this non-emptiness that needs to be left behind in order to proceed further. Leaving behind the non-emptiness of perception of space then leads on to the next experience, the attainment of the perception of boundless consciousness. This step, then, is empty of space perceptions. Yet this same experience is not empty insofar as the perception of boundless consciousness is still present. Properly undertaken, this genuine, undistorted, pure, and gradual descent into emptiness, the Buddha declared, will lead to the destruction of the influxes. Once the influxes have been left behind, and one's experiences are forever empty of any perceptual colored by these unwholesome influxes, the supreme and unsurpassable peak of emptiness has been reached. One of the implications is that the Chula Sunyata Sutta's treatment shows the early Buddhist concept of emptiness to be a qualification, not an entity. This can be inferred from the recurring refrain, according to which the meditating monk considers what has been transcended as empty of and what is still there as not empty of. In fact, the Chula Sunyata Sutta introduces the Pali term sunyata only once. The peak of realization through the destruction of the influxes has been reached. In contrast, the description of all the preceding stages merely employs the adjective sunya, empty. This indicates that the Chula Sunyata Sutta reckons only the destruction of the influxes as emptiness, furthermore qualified as unsurpassable. The preceding stages are only the Sunyata Vaka, entry into emptiness, but nothing short of total freedom from the influxes deserves to be reckoned as emptiness, true and proper. Another implication of the Chula Sunyata Sutta is that the proper approach to realization of emptiness, depicted step by step in this discourse and qualified as genuine, undistorted, and pure, yatha bucca avipallata parisuddha, is gradual. According to the finale of the discourse, all those who have gained the supreme and unsurpassable peak of emptiness, the destruction of the influxes, will in fact follow this gradual approach. The final stages of this gradual approach described in the Chula Sunyata Sutta leads from the signless concentration of the mind to the destruction of the influxes. In order to navigate this important junction, the Buddha instructs to contemplate the conditioned and impermanent nature of one's meditative experience. He in this way indicated that in order to attain the peak of emptiness, insight into conditionality and permanence should be developed. This highlights that contemplation of emptiness needs to be combined with the development of insight into conditioned and impermanent nature of reality, and insight to be applied in particular to one's present meditative experience. Other discourses confirm this need. They indicate that even the deepest and most sublime states of concentration need to be contemplated as impermanent and unsatisfactory, in addition to being contemplated as empty. Move on to the Chula Sunyata Sutta. Majjhima Nikaya 121, Chula Sunyata Sutta, the Shorter Discourse on Voidness. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living at Savatthi in the Eastern Park in the palace of Migada's mother. Then, when it was evening, the Venerable Ānanda rose for meditation, went to the Blessed One, and after paying homage to him, he sat down at one side and said to the Blessed One, Venerable Sir, on one occasion, the Blessed One was living in the Sakyan country, where there is a town of the Sakyans named Nigadaka. There, Venerable Sir, I heard and learned this from the Blessed One's own lips. Now, Ānanda, I often abide in voidness. Did I hear that correctly, Venerable Sir? Did I learn that correctly? Attend to that correctly? Remember that correctly? Certainly, Ānanda, you heard that correctly, learned that correctly, attended to that correctly, remembered that correctly. As formerly, Ānanda, so now too I often abide in voidness. Ānanda, just as the palace of Migada's mother is void of elephants, cattle, horses, and mares, void of gold and silver, void of the assembly of men and women, and there is present only this non-voidness, namely the signless dependent on the Sangha of bhikkhus, so too a bhikkhu not attending to the perception of village, not attending to the perception of people, attending to the singleness dependent on the perception of forest. His mind enters into that perception of forest and acquires confidence, steadiness, and resolution. He understands thus, whatever disturbances that might be dependent on the perception of village, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances that might be dependent on the perception of people, those are not present here. There is present only this amount of disturbance, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of forest. He understands this field of perception is void of the perception of village. This field of perception is void of the perception of people. There is present only this non-voidness, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of forest. Thus he regards it as void of what is not there, but as to what remains there he understands that which is present thus. This is present. Thus, Ānanda, this is the genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness. Again, Ānanda, a bhikkhu, not attending to the perception of people, not attending to the perception of forest, attends to the singleness dependent on the perception of earth. His mind enters into that perception of earth and acquires confidence, steadiness, and resolution. Just as a bull's hide becomes free from folds when fully stretched with 100 pegs, so too a bhikkhu, not attending to any of the ridges and hollows of this earth, to the rivers and ravines, to the tracks of stumps and thorns, the mountains and uneven places. He attends to the singleness dependent on the perception of earth. His mind enters into that perception of earth and acquires confidence, steadiness, and resolution. He understands thus whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of people, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of forest, those are not present here. There is present only this amount of disturbance, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of earth. He understands this field of perception is void of the perception of people. This field of perception is void of the perception of forest. There is present only this non-voidness, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of earth. Thus he regards it as void of what is not there, but as to what remains there he understands that which is present thus. This is present. Thus Ānanda, this too is genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness. Again Ānanda, a bhikkhu, not attending to the perception of forest, not attending to the perception of earth, attends to the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of infinite space. His mind enters into that perception of the base of infinite space and acquires confidence, steadiness, and resolution. He understands thus whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of forest, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of earth, those are not present here. There is present only this amount of disturbance, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of infinite space. He understands this field of perception is void of the perception of forest. This field of perception is void of the perception of earth. There is present only this non-voidness, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of infinite space. Thus he regards it as void of what is not there, but as to what remains there he understands that which is present thus. This is present. Thus Ānanda, this too is the genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness. Again Ānanda, a bhikkhu, not attending to the perception of earth, not attending to the perception of the base of infinite space, attends to the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of infinite consciousness. His mind enters into that perception of the base of infinite consciousness and acquires confidence, steadiness, and resolution. He understands thus whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of earth, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of the base of infinite space, those are not present here. There is present only this amount of disturbance, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of infinite consciousness. He understands this field of perception is not void of the perception of earth. This field of perception is void of the perception of earth. This field of perception is void of the perception of the base of infinite space. There is present only this non-voidness, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of infinite consciousness. Thus he regards it as void of what is not there, but as to what remains there he understands that which is present thus. This is present. Thus Ānanda, this too is the genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness. Again Ānanda, a bhikkhu, not attending to the perception of the base of infinite space, not attending to the perception of the base of infinite consciousness, attends to the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of nothingness. His mind enters into that perception of the base of nothingness and acquires confidence, steadiness, and resolution. He understands thus whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of the base of infinite space, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of the base of infinite consciousness, those are not present here. There is present only this amount of disturbance, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of no thingness. He understands this field of perception is void of the perception of the base of infinite space. This field of perception is void of the perception of the base of infinite consciousness. There is present only this non-voidness, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of no thingness. Thus he regards it as void of what is not there, but as to what remains there he understands that which is present thus. This is present. Thus Ānanda, this too is the genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness. Again Ānanda, a bhikkhu, not attending to the perception of the base of infinite consciousness, not attending to the perception of the base of no thingness, attends to the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception. His mind enters into that perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception and acquires confidence, steadiness, and resolution. He understands thus Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of the base of infinite consciousness, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of the base of no-thingness, those are not present here. There's present only this amount of disturbance, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception. He understands this field of perception is void of the perception of base of infinite consciousness. This field of perception is void of perception of base of no-thingness. There is present only this non-voidness, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception. Thus he regards it as void of what is not there, but as to what remains there, he understands that which is present thus. This is present. Thus, Ānanda, this too is the genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness. Again, Ānanda, a bhikkhu, not attending to the perception of the base of no-thingness, not attending to the perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception, attends to the singleness dependent on the signless concentration of mind. His mind enters into the signless concentration of mind and acquires confidence, steadiness, and resolution. He understands thus, whatever disturbances there might be, dependent on the perception of the base of no-thingness, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be, dependent on the perception of base of neither perception nor non-perception, those are not present here. There is present only this amount of disturbance, namely, that connected with the 6 bases that are dependent on the body and conditioned by life. He understands this field of perception is void of the perception of the base of no-thingness. This field of perception is void of the perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception. There is present only this non-voidness, namely, that connected with the 6 bases that are dependent on this body and conditioned by life. Thus he regards it as void of what is not there, but as to what remains there, he understands that which is present thus. This is present. Thus, Ānanda, this too is the genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness. Again, Ānanda, a bhikkhu, not attending to the perception of the base of no-thingness, not attending to the perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception, attends to the singleness dependent on the signless concentration of mind. His mind enters into the signless concentration of mind and acquires confidence, steadiness, and resolution. He understands thus, this signless concentration of mind is conditioned and volitionally produced. But whatever is conditioned and volitionally produced is impermanent, subject to cessation. When he knows and sees thus, his mind is liberated from the taint of sensual desire, from the taint of being, from the taint of ignorance. When it is liberated, there comes the knowledge. It is liberated. He understands. Birth is destroyed. The holy life has been lived. What has been done, what had to be done has been done. There is no more coming into any state of being. He understands thus, whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the taint of sensual desire, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the taint of being, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the taint of ignorance, those are not present here. There is present only this amount of disturbance, namely that connected with the 6 bases that are dependent on this body and conditioned by life. He understands this field of perception is void of the taint of sensual desire. This field of perception is void of the taint of being. This field of perception is void of the taint of ignorance. There is present only this non-voidness, namely that connected with the 6 bases that are dependent on this body and conditioned by life. Thus he regards it as void of what is not there, but as to what remains he understands that which is present thus. This is present. Thus, Ānanda, this is the genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness, supreme and unsurpassed. Ānanda, whatever recluses and Brahmins in the past entered upon and abide in pure, supreme, unsurpassed voidness, all entered upon and abided in the same pure, supreme, unsurpassed voidness. Whatever recluses and Brahmins in the future will enter upon and abide in pure, supreme, unsurpassed voidness, all will enter upon and abide in the same pure, supreme, unsurpassed voidness. Whatever recluses and Brahmins in the present enter upon and abide in pure, supreme, unsurpassed voidness, all enter upon and abide in the same supreme, unsurpassed voidness. Therefore, Ānanda, you should train yourself thus. We will enter upon and abide in pure, supreme, unsurpassed voidness. That is what the Blessed One said. The Venerable Ānanda was satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words.
Andamayam Dhamakataya Sadhukarang Dadamase.
Sadhu, 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 anumodam.
in order to maintain the fidelity of the translation, I left infinite consciousness and infinite space, but I think it'd be preferable like boundless, as Analayo refers, or even myself, the imperturbable. I think there's a connection with the imperturbable states of mind that are mentioned in, what sutta number is that? I don't know, do you remember? The imperturbable? 106, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's just, that's where translation is you get these different nuances, and it's helpful to know the different translations because each has a certain validity, but it casts a texture that's helpful to get a feel for what these are, as opposed to what it is as an intellectual concept. Or what is it? So what's the texture of it? What's
its experience?
Yeah, what's its experience? What's it feel like?
Could you explain what the last 8 of those feel like everywhere from Earth onward? I'm really lost with all those other ones.
It feels like there's increased levels of ease and well-being and freedom from dukkha.
Oh, that's nice.
I mean, that's important to sort of realize as well, again, because it's not moving towards a higher intellectual refinement as a more spacious and freedom from dukkha. I think that's important to sort of realize.
I think also one thing I really take to is I draw a parallel to the instructions to Bahia here. There's a lot of these kind of meditative things, other traditions or that associate most oftenly with nimittas, where they're absorbing into a mental sphere, they're cutting off the other sense bases, and there's this idea of like black nothingness. Whereas this clearly states at the end, there's the sixth space, there is the full awareness of the body in the six sense bases.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important reflection that it's...
It is incredibly important because there is that sense of... And it's quite prevalent in our inherited religious and philosophical traditions of trying to negate the body so that you can move to something truly spiritual. And the Buddha's integrating that. And the experience of the body and the sense bases is just as long as you're living, that's what's there. But you're approaching it from a different perspective, or having it more fully comprehended.
So one thing that I noticed was that I think in many other discourses, the base of neither perception nor non-perception is regarded as not it. Basically, that's something you attain, and it's impossible to do insight meditate, to do really insight there. It's when you come out of it that the insight happens. Whereas this portrays the meditator as actually analyzing that state while in it. And I'm not going to sort of request that we resolve that, because I know.
Thank you. No, it's a good observation, because there are so much of the literature, commentarial literature, is based on speculations around that it's good to sort of, and I really appreciate the fact that the Buddha isn't 100% consistent all the time, and that's quite wonderful, in that's much more real than and that's what the commentaries are trying to establish is an unequivocal, absolutely straight. It has to be like this, and the Buddha is saying, well, sometimes it's like this, and sometimes it's like that. This is what happens sometimes, and I think it gives it a much more real, again, texture.
I think, like, coming back to, I appreciate the sutta about the pegs too, how the Buddha's discourses are deeper and profound.
Yeah.
So even our assumption of what is insight, it's like in the wording of this, it's like he says, in the perception of, in the absorption of neither perception nor non-perception, he knows this is present. It's not like he thinks this is present, or he thinks and proliferates, but it's like he knows. It's like, for me, it's like, it's a state of knowing.
Yeah.
It's not like, it's a refined knowing, but it's not necessarily the fact that he's
Figuring
cogitating or figuring it out. But in my, I don't know, it seems more and more when we say insight, it's like the Buddha says knowledge and vision, so it's like, it's insight doesn't mean thinking the right thing, and then suddenly, like, but like, I don't know, it seems like more like knowing and seeing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thinking, I forgot, I think it was recently, like maybe during Midnight Tea, part of the discussion led to you recollecting sort of the imperturbability of Ajahn Chah, and sort of the unshakability, and that was something that really struck you.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm just thinking, connecting that maybe with like this sort of contemplative approach to these really refined states of mind, because you know, if you sort of just you're gunning for like really refined sort of mental states or whatever, you know, they're well known to be very fragile states, and they may not actually lead to sort of stability and freedom in your day to day. But maybe is it part of it, like combining that with the awareness of the body and the senses and contemplation?
Yeah, I think that to me there's a really direct correlation between that sense of knowing and seeing, having an experience of the, how do I say, to a certain degree, a shifting level of the experience, and having insight into that, where you're not trying to pin it down to one thing and then trying to achieve that and maintain it. It's more like there's a clarity and an insight that's able to hold it and not be shaken by the shifting nature of just like that, the experience of having a body with six senses that is going to because even when you have an insight, then you know there's going to be some shift there. And what is more important is not the object, but the actual what experiences it, the quality of knowing, and that's your place of liberation and refuge. And that's where there's that sense of imperturbability, because not because you've got it pinned down and nailed down and it's never going to change, but because you're able to be present with it, and it's not being tainted by desire, becoming, the delusion in any way. That's where your freedom from the asavas is from that internal movement, as opposed to having an object that's never going to change on you.
I left some out of the Analayo because the Samyutta Sutta is much more about interaction and with members of the. I think it's a lot referring to Ānanda being a socializer, like he should stop socializing. And this as well. I mean, it's like the Chula Sunyata is like there's all this referring to like the earth, like the ravines and the mountains and all this stuff. And in no point does he say, now go to a cave, sit down in front of a casino, and shut off the world.
Right,
that this really is it's tuning one's perception around what is actually present constantly, not shutting yourself off.
Yeah, that's great.
Lenpa, does everyone who attains Nibbana experience all of these levels of high absorption?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Those can be levels of say levels of attainment of we'll say meditative attainment. But yeah, so not necessarily. But because there's a say an understanding of process, then you can extrapolate.
I'm curious. I in like the teachings about most of the Kubajans that I've heard, I don't know if I've ever heard them refer to any of these levels, and I'm wondering if you have, or if you also haven't, why you think that is.
Let's see. Well, one, I think because culturally, the northeastern Thais are extremely practical and very down to earth. So the Gajahn Chah, when he spoke, I mean, I've heard him talk of different levels of both the say material and immaterial attainments, but in his teachings, he would almost never go beyond the fourth jhana, just because he felt that was enough, and who knows what his logic was, but you hate to postulate, but to me it's more around again this kind of temperament of being very practical, and it's okay. This is all you need. In the same way that so much of the Buddha's teachings, even though he dealt with those refinements, so much of it was okay. What you need, suffering, end to suffering, and so much of what he comes back to is that. Even though there are these very refined teachings on the levels of samadhi.
And assuming, why do you think the Buddha would give these teachings? Because there are those who would be inspired by this.
There are people who not only inspired, but there are people who are it's hard to sort of again, you're sort of postulating back to 2,600 years. But I do think that the presence of meditators was much more prevalent in his time than certainly in our time, and that there were many traditions of meditation. And if the Buddha hadn't, and all those are capable, all of those states are capable, accessible to the human mind. And if he didn't teach it and explain it and point it out, then he was overlooking a segment of the population who were experienced and who weren't and were capable of achieving those, and pointing out there's something beyond that.
I got one more. So this sutta begins. It more or less skips the first four jhanas and heads right to the immaterials, and. At first I was associating, I'm just trying to connect this with anything I can experience at all. But I gave up long ago, and now I'm like being motivated to try again. But the one who knows, and coming to rest in that. I mean, the Krubhajans seem to say that happens way down here near right after Upachara. So it's not voidness then, the one who knows. This is just a whole other thing up here that I'm...
Yeah, but I mean, it's also, it's helpful to understand in the sense that again, and is evidenced by Buddhist history, that there's a reification of refined states of consciousness and a reification of something called emptiness. And so the Buddha laid a very good foundation for the approach to that understanding of it.
I think also, if you look at the earth, this really isn't efficaciously any more different than 32 parts contemplation. You look at the body, and you're challenging that perception of my body by 32 parts.
This is who I am, or this is what the world is. Yeah.
And if you look at, like, when you're in the forest, and after you've considered the forest, you recognize that everything that could possibly be in the forest has come out of the earth.
Yeah.
It is either grown out of the earth and returned to the earth. It eats something out of the earth, so it's made of earth. All the food you eat is from the earth. I often visualize actually like the International Space Station stuff. There's nothing that can't be from the earth. And so you basically can then, that mode of practice is really not any different than the 32 parts. It's more designed, I think, externally to bring about dispassion towards external objects as opposed to internal dispassion towards a sense of self, which is what 32 parts does.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, this is very interesting reading. Because in my own experience, like I've heard Longport Plien be asked about, like, looking at food as disgusting, and he's like, oh, that's kindergarten. We're talking about the elements. And in my own experience, like the contemplation, really seeing that moment where everything, including my body, is the same as earth. Mm-hmm. It takes a lot of. I've only encountered like enough samadhi to actually have that stick in my heart, like once or twice. Yeah. So it seems like also, like these are more refined, and like the elemental contemplations actually do take a bit more power in the tank, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, this is, you start seeing how they relate to each other and how they affect each other, so that they, whether it's 32 parts or contemplation of food or contemplation of the elements, and those are they're interrelated, and they lead to a perception of relinquishment or dispassion or disenchantment, and which is really important for the practice.
Also, too, like on the topic of like basically not having really refined samadhi and the relevance of these teachings to it, like I don't know, like my sense is that like if one, say, like cultivates a kind of samadhi where one is just sort of hammering on the object and powering through, and then okay, so you do attain some sort of stability of mind, and then it's like, okay, switch gears now, I'm going to do vipassana or whatever. It's like that habit of mind is actually very strong because the samadhi is so strong. Whereas for those of us who don't have strong samadhi, but like we use more of a contemplative approach, like a wisdom-developed samadhi approach, is it the case that when our minds do settle down, because we've done all this contemplation preceding that, will it be more effective?
Hopefully. But no, it's really true, in the sense that because, how we approach something conditions what the result is, so that that use of contemplation and leading the mind or encouraging the mind to that contemplation of emptiness, a contemplation of emptiness of the asavas of say kamasava, bhavasava, vijasava, of sensuality, being, and ignorance. Those are, you're priming the mind to relinquish and let go. They're priming the mind for like just that animitta samadhi of a non-sticking to an object where one is ready to relinquish, or because of impermanence, so that you're priming the mind to be able to approach an experience, and then because the mind can be delighted in that, and not just as an intellectual concept, but as again, I mean, the intellectual concept can be stimulating, but then it comes back to that quality of, as there's a letting go or releasing, then the mind does start to settle. So yeah, I mean, it's a one is fostering the cultivation and development of samadhi, and by using the insight themes, and I think it helps. For us, I mean, and I speak for myself and probably for most people, that, generally, just to be able to sit down and make the mind become peaceful and one-pointed and focused on an object it's not easy. It's not second nature at all. But so one has to find the ways to encourage the mind to be able to be happy with settling. And so that those insight practices are very important, and those themes of that. It's like Ajahn Chah was really, sometimes he was kind of befuddled by Westerners. I mean, not so much befuddled, because, I mean, he was just curious, I think, to him that because, say, samadhi was so much second nature to him. It's sort of, why do you guys get so tweaked about samadhi? All you have to do is just watch your breath go in and out, and then let the mind settle. That's not our experience.
Do you think his Thai disciples had it easier than the Western disciples? Is there kind of a cultural difference?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It seems like too, it's so much important part of the process to just keep referring it back to the awareness and the affective state of mind.
Yeah.
All the concepts, all the ideas, all the mapping that they have access to is useful to some extent, but if that's where we're spending most of our time putting our attention on, rather than drawing it back into, okay, well, what is this like, and is it leading to
experience,
that sense of contentment, peace, release?
Yeah, because that's we can really create a lot of suffering trying to get it all mapped out and be trying to make our experience conform to what the map is, and that's, we miss the opportunity for say the purpose of the teaching.
And I guess that's where my question arises, because my own view tends to be in line with what Ajahn Kondañño just said. Yeah. So then, and he didn't so much like see everything here as the room or see everything here as the forest. That to me, yeah, that makes sense. It's more the mapping, the levels that I go, okay, for whom and what is the value of this? Is it so somebody can go, okay, now they're perception or non-perception, et cetera, I'm on the right track. Or
Well, I think the thing is you have to recognize that the Buddha was teaching a wide range of people, and and all of that is available, but it's up to us to sort of figure, well, what works for us, but just doesn't follow our particular bias or our own limited ability to realize the fruits of the practice. And so that's and certainly within the teachings, then everything is there, but because there is the range of possibility, or the range of people that the Buddha was teaching. Some of it doesn't necessarily apply to us. In that we're but that doesn't mean that the fruits of the teaching or the actual practice aren't there for us. We don't have to conform to absolute. It's like Ajahn Chah talking about the dependent origination. Yes, there are all of those series of experiences and causal conditions, but it's like Ajahn Chah said, but all you need to know is that you don't need to, if you're falling out of a tree, you don't have to count every branch as you're going down. You just, it's going to hurt when you hit the bottom.
One more question, I'm sorry. Just in terms of mapping out the essentials, is there is that whole progression sort of for this, Green Beret commando meditator series, or is you mentioned the Animitta Samadhi?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a common juncture where everyone has to pass through to achieve enlightenment, even if we don't pass through the four formless jhanas?
I would say so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's because that's an insight based. On a certain level, an insight based. That might not. That might be coloring it, in the sense that if you're trying to sort of think it through. But that Animitta Samadhi, in the sense of through not fixing on, because the tendency of the mind is to fix on phenomena, but then to understand the underlying. Because Animitta Samadhi, its access point is through understanding of anicca, of impermanence or uncertainty. So that when there's that understanding and acceptance and real feeling for impermanence, uncertainty, then the mind can rest without holding to trying to fix an object, and can allow the mind to be happy and comfortable with that peacefulness that is not based on it. So it's Animitta Samadhi. Okay. Walking meditation, sitting meditation.